This last lecture is going to conclude the unit on early Christian, Jewish, and Byzantine art, and we are going to focus on Byzantine art. So on this map, we can find Rome, which if you notice is on the eastern coast of Italy, almost to the coast, and Ravenna is north on the western coast. You see it's up right by the Adriatic Sea, so it's clear to see from this map why I've been emphasizing the fact of how important it is as a trade site, because look where Milan is, way up above Ravenna, and we have Venice up there. So all of these major cities, and if you notice there's a mountain range that is at the top of Italy that's blocking it off from France and Germany and the Holy Roman Empire. So they can take their ships out to the Adriatic Sea and then sail all the way down over here to Constantinople. They've got to go down the Adriatic Sea and then down around Greece and up into the Aegean Sea and into Constantinople at the entrance to the Black Sea by Asia Minor. So, again, in 395, Theodosius I split the Roman Empire into the Western and Eastern empires. This history of the Roman Empire at its end is a very complicated history. The capital of the West, and we've seen this, shifts between the cities of Rome and Ravenna, and it really depends on when it was safe to be in either city. The capital of the Eastern Empire, and this is where we're focusing now until we get back to Ravenna again, is Constantinople. At the end of this lecture, as you'll see, the Eastern Empire capital will shift to Ravenna when the Western Empire collapses, but we're not there yet. So, for the Western Roman Empire, as we've seen, the 5th century is a total period of constant invasion. We have the Visigoths in 410, 452, here comes Attila the Hun. Then the Vandals attack and gut Rome again. So in 476, the Western Empire collapses. And in 493, Theodoric will capture Ravenna and establish this elaborate court culture. And after he died in 526, Justinian I, who we'll look at the end of this lecture, ascended the throne of the Eastern Empire. And so the first great Christian empire was under Justinian I, and it's now referred to as the Byzantine Empire. So while Constantine was a Christian emperor, his empire was a Roman empire, although it had a Christian emperor. Justinian is different, as we'll see, because he actually establishes himself as a ruler alongside of Christ and creates a Christian empire, which we call now the Byzantine Empire. So, in 532, there was a riot in Constantinople. Half the city of Constantinople was destroyed. Justinian put down the riot. He restored the city. He made Constantinople the capital of the Byzantine Empire. But 8 years later, he recaptured Ravenna and maintained it as a center of power. He was really smart. He was a devout follower of the Orthodox Church, and he saw the advantages of moving to this Italian city up in northern Italy, up on the Adriatic Sea, and creating a center there. He was essentially an emperor-pope, a co-regent of Christ on earth. So, as an emperor, he sent armies out. He took back lands that were lost to barbarian invaders. He secured the Mediterranean. He drove the Goths all out of Italy. He forced the Vandals to surrender in North Africa. He pushed the Persians back all the way into Asia Minor. And he looked back to Caesar Augustus. He rewrote old Roman laws. He established this very complex bureaucracy. So he ran the empire very, very efficiently. So although he was Christian, he looked to Caesar Augustus for rule of government and for government structure. He knew where he needed to look to make a large empire such as this run. He felt it was his sacred duty to admonish any offenders to the faith. So he was a militant Christian in that he converted when he conquered. So although we have had controversy in Italy and the West, the Eastern Empire with Constantinople had been flourishing. And so the height of the Byzantine Empire is under Justinian, but he is inheriting an empire that's already strong. The western side has collapsed, but Justinian just made it golden. And he made himself the head of the church and state, and he established what was called the Justinian Code. And his wife was Theodora. So we'll begin in Constantinople with the Hagia Sophia. And one of his greatest achievements was the reconstruction of this building, the Hagia Sophia. Now you're going to look at this and say, well, wait a minute, that looks like a mosque. And well, you'll see why in a minute. But it was originally a Christian church, actually originally built by Emperor Constantine. And Constantius, Constantine's son, dedicated it, but they had riots in 404. It was destroyed. Then there was another church structure, which Theodosius II built. That was burned down again in 532. There was a revolt where the whole city was destroyed. These early times of Christianity and the Christian empire and these early ages of empires was a time of death, destruction, and war. So this reconstruction, begun by Justinian, was designed by two scientists, an expert in geometry who knew about kinetics and optics, and another man named Isidorus of Miletus. He taught physics at University of Alexandria in Constantinople. We have an establishment of academic learning now. We have commentaries on vaulting techniques, and I've given you a link to an essay about the Hagia Sophia. It's an essay from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. If you're interested, you could read it. So it became a mosque when Constantinople was conquered in 1453. And I just wanted to let you know the history of this so you know why it has minarets when it was a church and then it wasn't. So anyway, the minarets were added when it became a mosque over time in the 15th century. And really, it stayed a mosque until the Ottoman Empire fell in the early 20th century. In 1934, the Turkish government acquired it. Now it's a museum. And so they preserved all of the artwork in there, and you could go there and see it. It's a museum now. So here is an architectural plan and section. So the original Hagia Sophia, which is still intact, minus the minarets, was designed this way. It had a naos in the center. And of course, as you're going to see, because of its central plan, that made it very well adapted to Islamic worship. And when we look at Islamic art, you'll see why. But anyway, it has a center and then half domes all the way up around side, very much like Galla Placidia has. You can see these half domes and then a central dome up here. This is the earliest use of a dome on pendentives in a major building. So if you think back to the Roman Pantheon, the way that the light came into that building, it was just a dome on four walls with an oculus at the top. But the Hagia Sophia, they've added these windows all around the base of the dome. So it almost feels as though the dome is floating, as you can see here. Very luxurious ornamentation, and it just creates this circle of light. So the viewer's gaze is just drawn upward to the light and forward to the altar. You know, at the time the altar would have been in one of these apses, and the meditation then would let them rise from the world into a spiritual state. So in plan, it's a square, but the central section is realized as a basilica plan. So even though it's a square church, we have a little basilica in the middle, which is dominated by the dome, which makes it disrupts this longitudinal experience. In other words, you don't necessarily get that forward thrust that you get in a pure basilica plan church. It's the first large-scale building to place windows in a dome. And there's 40 of these arched windows. So you're meant to experience it as heaven on earth, and it's all done with very thin bricks that are embedded in mortar. So it's much, much lighter in construction than concrete or stone. So that made this very lightweight framework able to support it. You can get somewhat of the sense of the scale of this here because you can see these little people down here at the bottom. And of course, blue and gold mosaics. So all of this decoration, it's hard to see, but it's full of beautiful mosaic and porphyry, which is a type of luminous stone, marble slabs, all different color. So it's all exotic, brightly color, play of light. So it, again, like the Gala Placidia, it's symbolizing this mystical experience of God, this experience of the divine through light. Okay. Here I want to talk to you for a minute about icons, because icons are small images that are used throughout the Byzantine Empire and even into today in the Eastern Orthodox Church. They're images that are meant to be venerated, so it means that the viewer respects the image, and they usually don't have any narrative. For this reason, they're very, very powerful. And so the Byzantine style contributes to the power of icons, and we've seen the beginnings of it in the Christ the Good Shepherd in that early Christian art of Gala Placidia, but this gets continued into Byzantine figures, which is one reason why I'm putting the icons here, because it's a really good example of the Byzantine depiction of the Christ figure. The figures stare right out at you with very big eyes, very flat frontal style. A lot of use of a lot of blue, a lot of gold, very typical of Byzantine style. So here is our icon image. So you can see roots of that Christ the Good Shepherd here, the same way the eyes and the nose are depicted, the shape of the face, the gold halo, but it's much flatter and much more stylized here. We have absolutely no sense of space. So it's a figure that is it's always going to represent some type of sacred figure or event. Icons can be made out of any kind of material, and faithful people that venerate icons actually believe that icons have miraculous powers to transmit messages. So it's not like you're getting on your knees and worshiping the icon. You're not worshiping it like an image. What you're doing is looking at the icon, using that to in a way, center your thoughts and then talk to God through this visualization technique. So it's early meditation techniques. Actually pretty interesting if you think about it. So this particular example of an icon, of which there are many, although not as many as we wish there would be due to iconoclasm, which we'll talk about next. But anyway, Mary is the throne of wisdom. And then next to her, we see St. George and St. Theodore. Now, both of those saints slew dragons, so they are symbols of the triumph of the church over paganism, of course. And then in the background, we have two angels looking up toward heaven. So there's a lot of messages packed into this little image. Here's a link to the National Gallery of Art with information about icons and pictures of other icons. So Eastern Christians would pray to Christ, Mary, and the saints. And so all icons have different groupings of Christ, maybe just Christ or just Mary or Mary and Christ, different saints. But most early icons were destroyed in the 8th century in a reaction to veneration of images known as iconoclasm. And so this icon, interestingly, you can notice where its provenance is. This is from Mount Sinai in Egypt, but the Byzantine Empire, as we've already established, was a huge empire, and they were fairly consistent in their artwork. Can notice the dress on these saints here, this ecclesiastical dress that they're wearing. So between 726 and 843, we have a period of iconoclasm occurred where people who made or venerated icons were persecuted. And we had an emperor, Leo III, who believed that veneration of icons was a form of idolatry and banned their use. So you notice the dates here, and this is after Justinian, but it's pertinent to the evolution of the Eastern Christian Church. Iconoclasm is the banning or destruction of images, and most especially icons in religious art. So we have iconoclasm in 8th and 9th century Byzantium. We also had it in 16th and century Protestant territories because people believed differently about the power and meaning and purpose of imagery in religion. Now, the word iconoclasm is specific to religious imagery. So we do have, as we've seen even in current events of today, destruction of images for all sorts of reasons, including political ones. But that wouldn't always necessarily be called iconoclasm, because iconoclasm is specifically destroying images because of religious belief. So, for example, when radical Islamic sects destroyed the large images of the Buddha some years ago, that was because they believed that it was wrong to depict a religious subject, in that case, the Buddha. So they were iconoclastic in that they would destroy the Buddhist images or religious images. If they're destroyed for some other reason, it's still image destruction, but it's not iconoclasm. So I hope that's clear. But anyway, in this case, it's destruction of religious images for religious reasons. So one aspect of this persecution is the growing power of monasteries. And, everything is complicated. There's not just one reason for anything, but monasteries are really beginning to achieve a great deal of power in communities and challenge the authority of the emperor because they didn't have to pay taxes and they had a great deal of clout, a great deal of say. They made a lot of money for goods they produced, such as icons. So in 765, Constantine V actually persecuted the monks that made icons. They tortured them, blinded them, mutilated them, executed them, and a lot of the pictorial art of Justinian's age was destroyed, with Ravenna escaping because of its location. But in 843, the last iconoclastic emperor died and his wife reversed his policies. But we would have a lot more icons if the iconoclastic controversy hadn't happened. So here's some reasons. People are either iconoclasts, anti-image, or iconodules, pro-image, and iconoclasm will continue throughout our history, even into today. So here's some reasons, not all reasons, but for some of the following reasons, some iconoclasts believe that the scriptures forbid images. They say it's idolatry. They quote the Old Testament. Also, they believe that images confuse the two natures of Christ. They believe that if we make an image of Christ, it will defy his divinity. It says that he's human. If he was divine, you wouldn't be able to make an image of him. So that's another reason why we don't want to have it. And they think Christ should only be portrayed in symbol. So back to what I was saying about St. Lawrence. Some Christians believe that you should never depict any of the saints or Mary, or just only symbols of what they are, rather than the actual people. So for example, in the Eucharist, we have the bread and the wine. So maybe Christ should only be depicted by images of the bread and wine of the Eucharist, and that would mean Christ, rather than showing him as a man. Now, iconodules, on the other side, believe that we should keep images, and here's some of their reasons, not all, but some. They say art is the Bible of the poor. So if you're poor and you can't read, how are you going to know anything unless you can see these images and learn the stories from them? They confirm that Christ was human. So, and this goes into a much deeper conflict in the church about the humanity of Christ, that if you're an iconojewel, you firmly believe that God became human in the form of Christ. That Christ is God, but it's because he's God become human. And that God commanded images on the Ark of the Covenant. Therefore, images are decreed by God, that you can commune with the image through meditation and then commune with God through the image through meditation. And then miracles occur, such as healing the sick, and they've documented these miracles. So that takes me to the split of the Catholic Church and the nature of Christ and his divinity. So in 1054, so roughly a little over 1,000 years after Christ was born, 1,000 years after he died, the church split into Western Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches, geographic divisions, of course. And in the Byzantine Empire, we're talking about the thread of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Another is because the difference in language. The Roman Catholic Church spoke Latin and the Greek Orthodox Church spoke Greek, but their main reason was philosophical and doctrinal. They held many, many different councils to discuss the nature of Christ. Was he divine? Was he human? Was he co-eternal with God, but not fully divine or entirely divine? Or was he both? These were very, very important questions, and for many Christians still are. So the Western Catholic Church believes that Christ is both human and divine, but stresses his humanity, while the Eastern Orthodox Church believes that he is both human and divine, but stresses his divinity, with some congregations only accepting his divinity. So back to Ravenna. Ravenna was conquered, as we've seen, by the Byzantine Empire in 540, and it served as a base for the conquest of Italy. So Justinian has, as we've seen, had his capital in Constantinople, but he moves to Ravenna. And so he builds two churches in Ravenna. One is a central plan, the Church of San Vitale, and the other church is a basilica planned church in the port, Santa Apollonia, built in 549, although I do not have very many images of that one, but you can find it online. Here is the Church of San Vitale in Ravenna, and it is an octagon. It looks a lot like the mausoleum of Galla Placidia, but it's built by Justinian. It's extended, though, with these semicircular bays, and then there's an ambulatory all around the outside of it and a gallery all covered up by a round dome. And so it's not completely symmetrical because one of the bays is broken into a rectangular sanctuary. So we have roots in Roman buildings like Santa Costanza, and it's using a system of, again, pendentives and squinches for support, as we've seen with the Hagia Sophia. There are architectural elements holding up support to a dome. There's a good description of them in your text, and this will just remind you of that image, and I highly recommend that you go back to the textbook and read this page again. Basically, what they do is in these little spaces, they add extra support for the dome. So the squinches are a little bit more boxy. You can see a squinch in here. So here is our plan and cutaway drawing of San Vitale, remembering, of course, that when we look at these plans, all of the solid spaces are solid walls and all the open spaces are openings. So these are circular colonnades. You can see them here. If you look at the top, you can see these rounded spaces around the central dome area that I've labeled exedrae. And if you look down at the bottom drawing where the gallery is and you see those series of columns, they're like round colonnades. That's what those round flower-like appendages are indicating. The narthex is out to the back, and then we have little apsidal chapels all the way around it. So you enter from the right and you see arch openings, but if you enter from the left, the sanctuary is going to be straight ahead. So the whole inside of it is very complex, interpenetrating interior spaces. It's almost hard to figure out where you are when you go in, as you can see here. And so all of these different spaces interconnect. So San Vitale, he was a 4th century Roman martyr. We don't know exactly how he was killed, maybe in a Roman amphitheater. We don't really know. So that's who San Vitale is dedicated to. And so we have Saint Vitalis, who it's named after, and Bishop Ecclesius with Christ enthroned. That's who these white figures are on either side of the Christ. And they are presenting a model of the church to Christ. So the saints are giving Christ the Christian church. And then there's all sorts of other images that relate to the celebration of the Eucharist. Here's another view of the interior with some other mosaics in it at a banquet and images of the different images here. And here is Emperor Justinian, who we're going to see in a minute. So the apse, this is the apse in the sanctuary. All of the side walls, the apse, the vault, they're all decorated with mosaic. And the overall program is stories from the Old Testament that prefigure the Eucharistic sacrifice. So the Eucharist is a sacrifice. And here is a better view of Christ. He's wearing purple, so the royal color, and he's on an orb of the earth. So this is a symbol of Christ as the ruler of the universe. And interestingly, he's depicted as youthful and clean-shaven, which early images of Christ, he doesn't get a beard until just a little bit later, and some later images of Byzantine art do give him the beard, but early images, as in early Christian art, he's still shown young and clean-shaven. On either side of him, we have angels. To his right, of course, is San Vitale, and to his left is Ecclesius, who was the first bishop of Ravenna from 521 to 532. So San Vitalia and the first bishop of Ravenna are given equal importance as they present the church to Christ. So here are the imperial mosaics, which represent Justinian and his wife Theodora. And I want to unpack these for you because they're definitely propagandistic images in a little bit of a way, in that Justinian is shown co-ruling with Christ. Here we have symbols of Christ and the 12 disciples. He has 6 soldiers and 6 priests on either side of him. They're all presenting gifts to Christ in the apse. Justinian, again, he's got the royal purple, but he's holding the bowl for the Eucharistic bread. And again, we have this very typical Byzantine style, very flat, very frontal, these large eyes, these dark outlines, gold halos, pattern. Byzantine artists have a love of pattern throughout. And then, again, this is all mosaic. And here's his wife, the Empress Theodora. So both of the images in Theodora and the images of Justinian don't feel terribly solid. They're very flat. There's not a lot of depth. But we can see here that the setting for Theodora is more specific than that for Justinian. But both compositions are very well balanced. They're very clear. This is a hallmark of this period in art, that it's very important that this art be easy for any viewer to understand. Theodora is holding the chalice for the Eucharistic wine. So here is a detail of Emperor Justinian, and he is not Christ, but he is embodying Christ. He is holding his position as emperor through the will of Christ and through the will of God. Look at the beautiful detailing in the mosaic, the patterns in her attendants' robes. Here's another view of the interior of San Vitale. And if you look up to your right and your left, you can see these apse mosaics. And here's just some more details. So Theodora is emulating the Magi with her gifts. So these images really mix imperial ritual, Old Testament narrative, and Christian liturgical symbolism in one narrative image. In terms of space, just a note that Byzantine artists really didn't conceive pictorial space in the same way that the Romans did. So they would often use invisible rays of sight so to speak. So the pictorial space might extend all the way forward from the picture plane into the eye of the beholder and then include the real space between them. And they're using what's called reverse perspective, parallel lines diverging as they get farther away. So the importance of light in Christian art, it's these predominance of the gold backgrounds, the beautiful reflective surfaces of the tesserae, that this is an underlying theory through all of Byzantine art. And I'll leave you with this thought about Justinian, as here is an image of Augustus, who we saw in the previous section, and an image of Justinian on the right. So look at these two images together, just in your own mind. Which one do you think better conveys the divine right to rule? Both of them are claiming divine power to hold their empire. And Justinian definitely looked at Caesar Augustus as a model for how to create an empire and how to rule one. So it's interesting, to me anyway, to look at these two images side by side. You can also see, when you look at these two images together, some of the Roman influence in the treatment of the drapery and the proportions of the figures. This is the interior of the Church of St. Apollinaire, which is, as you recall, a basilica plan church. Very, very different in feel and style from the Church of San Vitale, even though both were built by Justinian in roughly the same time period. And this has, you can really see the difference in emphasis between a basilica plan church and a central plan church. The jeweled cross up above symbolizes the Transfiguration, and the Old Testament figures below it legitimize this new religion. So here are Gospels from this period. This is another example of a manuscript a little bit later than the manuscript we looked at a moment ago. So the illustration, again, you can see that it's inspired by the church painting and the mosaics. It's a narrative depicting these biblical events and the Christian story through symbolism. But again, we see this use of the large halo, large eyes, dark outlines, bright colors.